What's up, bipeds? So today we're talking about training volume, which is typically measured in sets per muscle group per week. Now, it's important to realize that not all sets are created equal. Clearly. So here are the 6 factors. I'll just put them up on the screen right away so you know what I'm going to be talking about in the video. I'm not going to wait, make you fucking salivate on my every word. The first one is going to be how close you are to failure. Now, different people define failure just a little bit differently. For some people, failure is when the bar speed slows. So if you're banging out reps at 1 second per concentric, you're just hammering out reps, and then one slows down a little bit, maybe a second and a half, to some people, that is failure because they failed to get a rep in the same amount of time. To me, that is absolute bullshit, but it's very common to see. Someone will start doing a set, and then when it gets even a little bit hard, they'll just stop. This is the average person in the gym, and to do this, you're going to have to do a ton of volume to get decent results because every set really isn't stimulating all that much progress. It's essentially somewhere between a warm-up and a true working set. So if you do a lot of this type of stuff, you're going to have to do a lot of it to see results. And this explains why some studies, they say you can do 45 sets of squats to failure per week and see really good results. It's just because every single set isn't that hard. Beyond that, sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6 or more reps beyond that, depending on how quickly you stop the set, is going to be technical failure. So this is going to be when you stop the set when you no longer have perfect form. Ideally, if you're an experienced trainee, you should be able to hold your form until you get an extremely grindy rep. So you might have a 4, 5, 6, 7-second rep, or maybe even a little bit longer without your form breaking down. Because you have more training experience, you should be able to focus and make sure that the tension is in the right places and that your form is not breaking down, even if it's a long and horrible rep. It's also worth noting that some people fail technically before true failure. So perhaps they're doing biceps curls and they could get one more very strict rep, or maybe even 2 or 3 more strict reps, but they start to cheat, and therefore they are beyond technical failure because they don't have perfect form anymore. This is sort of muddy. It's beyond failure, but you didn't actually fail, so it's sort of hard to exactly define where this is in the spectrum.
That's my failure.
I see this all the time. Someone could have gotten more reps with perfect form. They just didn't. They basically decided to cheat or for their form to break down because it was easier when their form broke down. I would say this is not advisable.
Failure.
If you go beyond failure, that's one thing with cheated reps or slow eccentrics or something. But if you avoid failure by cheating or by doing a drop set when you were actually 3 reps away from failure for the initial set, I don't think you're going to be getting very much out of this. Finally, as I just noted, you can actually go beyond technical failure by using cheated reps or slow eccentrics or having a partner help you up or using rest pause. So you go to failure and then you take a few seconds to rest and then you go to failure again, etc. Myo reps, cluster sets, this type of thing. My book has a ton of options here. It has an entire chapter on high intensity techniques. You can grab it on my website. It is on sale right now for $15, which is honestly a hell of a price. There's a ton of information there which can help you on your fitness journey. So there's going to be a continuum, which is going to determine your volume. In the middle, you have technical failure. Before that, a few reps, you have where most people have volitional failure. They just give up, they stop trying, to where they stop trying when the bar speed slows ever so slightly. I see this all the time, even in advanced athletes. Then on the other side, you have beyond failure, to where you're doing these drop sets, these partials, whatever high intensity techniques that you want to use. So if you set technical failure as the midpoint, you can sort of decide your volume based on where you are in proximity to this. It's just very important to be honest about how close you are to actual technical failure. So if you're going beyond technical failure, that is actually going to reduce the amount of sets that you can do, because every single set is just a ball-bursting, epic, soul-wrenching, destructive task that you have to perform. So you can't do more than a few sets of that because every single set takes a lot out of you. It also gives you a lot in terms of stimulation, but it's just more in terms of magnitude. Similarly, before failure, it gets exponentially easier. 1 rep in reserve is not the same as 0 reps in reserve. And 0 reps in reserve is not the same as actually pushing really hard on that last set and failing. A lot of people say they train to failure when they're actually training just before failure. They're anticipating failure on that last rep, and they are giving up before the rep even happens. But I think attempting that rep has value. It changes things quite significantly because fatigue is going up and stimulus is going up as well. So you do get something out of that last attempt, even if you fail, especially if you fail. Now, where you want to be on this curve of lower intensiveness and higher volume, or more intensiveness per set and lower volume, or somewhere in the middle, is honestly up to you. Some people swear by the higher volume approach. Other people say, I do 1 set to failure once per week, and that can possibly bring results. I've seen, times in my training career when I've gotten decent results, even very good results that I was very happy with, from doing 1 set past failure on an exercise per week. And some people say that's impossible based on the research. But in practice, a lot of people use DC training. It's one of the most popular training methods of all time because it works, even though it is low volume. It's because you're going to failure or extremely close, and then you keep attacking that failure with rest pause sets.
And I did that by training calves once a week, 3 sets. I did 1 set on the standing calf raise to warm up, 1 set to failure, total failure, and 1 set of seated calf raise to total failure. And I've trained other people with that, and they've got incredible results as well.
You have both sides criticizing each other. And I think it's important to honestly assess where you are in this continuum and realize that it changes the volume considerations significantly. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of bros who are often on this side, they're doing tons of drop sets and partials and just destroying themselves, they take science not very seriously at all. Because they say these studies that say the participants did 40 sets per week to failure. And these guys are like, that wasn't failure. Because it was volitional failure in a lot of cases. And then these guys are like, these guys are just doing 1 set per muscle group per week or something, or 2 or 3 sets. If they did more volume, they get so much better results. Look at the data. Look at the studies that prove to failure for 40 sets per week is not only possible, but you get great results. And so there's sort of a disconnect between both sides, and I think it's important to have context with where you are and how that influences the volume that you can do and recover from. Number 2, we have the type of movement, the actual exercise that you are doing. Let's say you want to target your hamstrings, and 1 week you do 5 sets with a certain reps in reserve on seated hamstring curls. It's a fine exercise. I do it all the time. I really, really enjoy it. And I get good results from it. Then the next week, you go and you do RDLs instead. Now, I'm not saying you should change your exercise every single week. Actually, you shouldn't do that. It's just for the purpose of this example. Let's say you do 5 sets on Romanian deadlifts. Sitting back, keeping a neutral spine, focusing on the hamstrings, maybe even getting anterior pelvic tilt to get a full stretch on the hamstring muscle. You're sitting back, you're going slow, you're pausing at the bottom even, you're trying to pull down with the hip flexors and rip your goddamn hamstrings in half every single rep. And let's say you're doing, the same sets, the same reps, the same proximity to failure as the seated hamstring curl. Which one is going to get you better results? I would say the Romanian deadlifts, for sure. It's just a more stimulatory movement. You just get more per set out of that movement. It also causes more fatigue, so you can argue about the stimulus to fatigue ratio or whatever, which one would be wiser. But in terms of volume recommendations, to me it is very clear that the RDL simply is not the same as a leg curl. They are totally different in terms of how much volume you can and should do. Furthermore, while they're both targeting the hamstrings, the Romanian deadlift is also targeting the calves a little bit to stabilize. It's targeting the glutes because you are extending the hip and the glutes are very much involved with that as well. It's targeting the spinal erectors to make sure that you don't snap your shit up. It's working the lats to keep the bar close. Same thing with the long head of the tricep to keep the bar close. Same thing with the rear delts and a lot of those muscles back there to keep the chest up and to keep the bar close. It's working the traps to keep the chest up. It's also working the upper traps because you have a large weight hanging from your arms. It's also working your grip because you have to hold on to the bar. So it's just working a lot more musculature than a seated hamstring curl. And I think a lot of people don't take this into account. Does a set of RDLs count as a set for traps? I've had super sore traps from Romanian deadlifts. I've even had sore lats from Romanian deadlifts. So same with spinal erectors, same with a lot of these muscle groups. If you're using a sort of MRV, MEV, max recoverable volume, whatever, to see how many sets per muscle group per week you should do, which I think in concept is very, very good and you should think about, it does very quickly become very tiresome. Because is a Romanian deadlift only hamstrings? Is it half a set for glutes? Is it a third of a set for lats? You know, where do you sort of draw that line between what is a compound movement actually targeting? Because the load is going to vary based on your technique, based on your leverages, based on the exercise itself, and it really does vary quite a bit. It becomes very, very clear that a set is not a set. It's also worth noting that some movements just beat people up. For some people, they can do like 5 sets of lateral raises to failure or past failure, no problem. They do 1 set of upright rows and their shoulders are just like wrecked for a week. And so it is very individual. Some people, they just seem to be more fragile in certain areas. So know yourself and know that how much you can recover from is going to vary based on the exercise. I think also strength curves do have something to do with this. You have some movements that seem to be more of like a pumping movement. So if you do a spider curl, it's hardest in the top position. It puts most of the stress in this top position. So it's more of a contracting, squeezing, pumping type of movement. If you switch up your body positions and you're doing, let's say, an incline dumbbell curl where you're not leaning forward, you're leaning back, suddenly it's putting more of like a stretched position. So most of the tension is in that bottom position. Same thing with a preacher curl where your arm is out in front of you. It's just different. Stretching movements, generally speaking, seem to take more recovery time because you're just causing more muscle damage and it's putting the muscle in that stretch position. And again, you can't really equate one set of an exercise even if they are both isolation exercises. Number 3, we have by muscle group. I would say generally speaking, the larger the muscle group, the more recovery time that it needs. However, there are definitely exceptions and it's going to be individual as well. Some people find that their hamstrings, just can't take as much volume. I would say that's very, very common. Other people find that, maybe their biceps get sore really easily. Other people find that they almost never get sore biceps and they can train their biceps super high volume, super high frequency, all the freaking time, and they don't ever see any repercussions. Other people, they can legit only train their biceps a few sets per week, and it's not only enough, they just can't recover from more. I would say in general, if you've heard of someone tearing a muscle group, it's probably more prone to muscle damage. So you hear of sprinters tearing their hamstrings or pulling their hamstrings all the freaking time. It's just more at risk mechanically. I'm not saying you shouldn't train it, it can't recover from as much. Same thing for biceps. You hear about people popping a biceps on the deadlift all the freaking time. Same thing with the pec. Bench pressing heavy, boom. Part of your chest is now on the other side of the chest. But have you heard of someone tearing a trap?
It's a trap! There's too many of them.
Tearing a calf?
There's too many of them.
Probably not. Some of these muscles just don't really take as much damage and they're not as at risk to take on mechanical loading. probably just due to how the muscles insert into the joint, etc. But it's also going to vary from individual, so I think it's important to listen to your body. Next up, we have intensity, or how heavy you are going.
Heavy shit.
Now, rep range is going to be something pretty individual. I know I'm saying that quite a bit in this video. Generally speaking, heavy weights will tax the joints quite a bit more than lighter weights. However, lighter weights will cause more metabolic stress, and they might cause more calcium ions doing their thing and causing more soreness. Most people won't get sore from sets of like 1 to 2 to 3 or even 4 to 5. Maybe some people, especially if you're more fast twitch. But I would say generally speaking, on the whole, higher reps will cause more overall disruption, with the exception of course, lighting up the joints. Example, I've done workouts, not smart workouts, but workouts nevertheless, where I did 20 sets of 20 singles with around 95% of 1 rep max on the close grip bench press. Is that really worth 20 sets? I mean, it's 20 hard efforts, it's near 100%, it's near maximal. Probably not very smart, that's for sure. But is it really worth 20 working sets? Is that the same as like a 20 by 10 or a 20 by 20 at the same RPE? No, okay, it's not even really close. So rep range, I think, does play a role. Number 5, we have frequency. So the more frequently you train a particular muscle group, the more volume you can get away with. If you're doing more of a bro split, you're doing all your volume on one day, I think there is a limit to how much productive volume you can do on one day. I would say that limit is probably somewhere between 8 and 12 sets based on the research. Once you go beyond that, I don't think you're really going to be getting all that much out of it. But if you do that 3 times per week, suddenly you're at close to 30 sets. Obviously, that's still very, very high, but I think it's at least doable. Whereas 30 sets on one day, I think you're sort of just wasting your time at that point, just because the quality and the productiveness of every single set falls off pretty drastically. However, I also think it's important to note that you can work out too frequently, and if you are doing, 18 workouts per week, you're just doing multiple workouts per day, all for a particular muscle group, you're not really giving it the opportunity to recover, and it's also highly likely that you're not going to be training close to failure. So even if you're doing what you think is failure, if you know you have another workout later in the day targeting the same muscle group, perhaps mentally you're going to be holding back a little bit, which is actually optimal. But if you change the structure of your training to make sure that you're not doing such crazy frequencies, you might be able to push closer to failure and get more out of those sets. Finally, you have your ability to recover. It's going to be different for every single person. If you have a training background, you can probably recover more easily just because those mechanisms of muscle repair are going to be fired up, ready to go. If you take some time off training, and then now you're back to the gym, you're going to get sore way more easily, even with less volume. So keep in mind, it's not just your training history in terms of like years and decades, but also what you've been doing recently. If you switch to, maybe doing bilateral squats to doing Bulgarian split squats for the first time, you haven't done those in months, your glutes are probably going to be sore, even from fairly low volume. But as you adapt, the soreness will go down, the individual stimuli per set will also go down, and therefore you can scale up the volume. Genetics also do play a role here. Some people seem to not have as much of an inflammatory response to training. Obviously, skeletal structures and joints will play a role here. In the long term, the limiting factor is usually the joints and not the muscle. So keep in mind that, especially if you're doing some exercises, that could add up over time, and you might want to mix and match different exercises to make sure you can do enough volume and you're not stressing one particular area in particular. Oh, that was horrible. God damn it. Now, as an illustration, let's compare the easiest imaginable working set with the hardest imaginable working set. Now, the hardest imaginable working set, let's say you're doing a quadruple drop set on deficit deadlifts. Don't do this, by the way. This is just a conceptual illustration. don't fucking do this, okay? I'm making this very, very clear. Do not do what I am about to say. You're doing a quadruple drop set on deficit deadlifts, followed by partner-assisted reps, followed by partials. So you start out, you do like, say, a heavy set of 3 or 4, to failure. You can't get that last 5th rep up or whatever. You're shaking, you're shuddering, your head is about to explode, you fail. You take 10 kilos off of each side, you go again. The first drop set, you're smashing out more reps. Let's say you get 6 reps, you're shattered, but you go again. This is the next drop set. You take another 10 kilos off each side, you go again. Your back is super pumped, you're on fire, your hamstrings are destroyed, your blood pressure is through the roof. Next drop set, now you're down to like 30 or 40% of your 1 rep max or something, and you're just smashing out reps until you fail. It's a pathetic amount of weight. It's what you use to warm up, but you're so destroyed that you're like hitching and trying to get the weight up.
Almost shit myself there.
Then your partner is like, who I assume is the fucking devil, helps you up and helps you with this rep, and you control the eccentric of this deficit shitty ass deadlift.
I broke my back.
He helps you up again. He's such a friendly guy.
A vertebrae or
And he helps you again and again and again until he can no longer help you and you can't control the eccentric. Then you have a rack pull ready with a light weight, and you're just doing partial range of motion rack pulls, and you're shitting blood and you're vomiting shit, and it's just destruction everywhere.
I'm gonna shit myself there.
You then collapse to the ground and literally die.
Spinal.
How long does it take you to recover from that? Well, you're dead, so I guess your MRV is 1. Compare that to a very light and very easy set of seated leg curls. Not even seated leg curls. That uses the hamstring. It's a big muscle group. Let's say seated lateral raises, where you don't go to failure. You go, like, say, 6 reps away from failure, and you call it a day. How many sets of that can you recover from in a week? It could be 30, 40, 50, 60 sets, because every set is incredibly easy. You're working a tiny amount of muscle mass, you're nowhere near failure, you're not using any high intensity techniques, and there's very little mechanical stress or death involved. So they really are night and day. Anyway, that is all for this video. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications, ignore my musings, all that good stuff, and I will see you, perhaps, in that next video. Peace! Nailed that.